for tax professionals to stay abreast of trends in technology and to learn best practices that will help today's tax departments reach new levels of operational excellence. The educational opportunities that ACT offers to the members include the bi-monthly webinars, such as this one, bi-monthly electronic newsletters, as well as our conference, publications, and survey results, and much, much more. But before we begin today's webinar, there are a few ground rules that I'd like to go over. We would like to ask you to keep all lines muted. If you have a question or concern during the session, you can use the chat feature being monitored by a CFO services representative. And at the end, we will answer as many questions as possible. Additionally, we ask that you exit out of all other applications that are currently running on your computer so that we can optimize today's viewing of the webcast. Today, we will have a replay of today. It will be available after the webinar and can be found by clicking through the link on the ACT website. But please allow us a few days to get that presentation to be posted. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter for today. His name is Nick Penko. Nick is the Vice President at CFO Services and has worked exclusively with R&D credits over the last 10 years. In that time frame, he has worked with numerous industries and size of companies, including Fortune 500 companies. Nick assists clients in areas of service innovation, client relations, strategy consulting, advising, managing, and other R&D engagement managers, project consultants at CFO Services, and integrates the internal process capabilities for clients seeking every degree of service related to R&D credits. Clients work with Nick because of his experience and the level of attention that he brings to each client. Nick's background includes plant operation experience at multiple manufacturing facilities, a management consulting role with a Big Four firm, where he managed R&D projects for several Fortune 500 companies. Nick holds a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering. He's an enrolled agent's license and a master's degree in business administration. I'm now going to turn the webinar over to Nick.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul. I appreciate the introduction and the kind of laying the ground rules for the webinar. For one other thing that you should see out there on your screen, you'll see a full screen button. So as we get into some of the slides, or if you want to make it bigger on your screen, by all means, go ahead. And as Paul said, we'll be monitoring the chat. We're kind of we have that there. Another individual in the R&D credit group will be monitoring that. So please ask questions in the chat or chime in that way. And we'll also have a time at the end to do some question and answer as we go through. So without further ado, let's kind of kick it off for today. We're kind of the title, Utilizing People and Technology Collaboratively for Research Credits. Kind of the agenda when it was sent out is to think of a couple things of, when is it the right time for technology and people? What is the right complexity? How do we get buy-in, and what should it cost? Now, I try to cover the topic at a higher level. It's not going to, we're not going to get into all of the items, that I'd love to get into because we just have an hour. But I want to give some concepts and thoughts of dealing with complex tax topics. And what I mean by that is, we're talking about, foreign tax credits, transfer pricing, UTP, things like that, and dealing with the people and the software. And for today, the topic we're going to kind of, use as our example are research credits, because that would be kind of a complex tax topic. Now, I'll assume that everybody knows the basics and understands about the research credit, about, there's something beyond the number within the research credit. So we won't go through that today. I'm trying to use that with the theme that I'm talking about today. The research credits is getting into complex topics, and then the software side. We will go we'll go through some sharing of my screen of our RCM product, which is for research credits today. But it's not going to be the full demonstration, just to kind of give you that sense. But just to kind of keep it within the theme of what we're talking about and use it as an example. So, and we get involved. That's kind of our bailiwick, are those complex topics or credits and incentives. All right. So this is a very simple slide to kind of start it off at the basics, at the groundwork. People and software. Now, we tend to think, and when I say that, generally I'm probably talking about myself a lot too, is we tend to gravitate to one side or the other. We think of something that we're going to do, either we'll let the software do it all, or we'll do it very manually. And we might do it manually in an electronic format, but we're still doing it very manually. We tend to gravitate toward one another or toward one side or the other. We have to kind of work towards staying balanced. And what we want to do is get people to work within the software or with the software, not exclusive to it. And as I said, keeping that balance requires a disciplined approach as we implement these into our organizations. So again, keeping a little bit high level, and we'll dig down as we get further and further into the slides. So if you think of it this way, tax software, think of our processes that we have in our tax departments. On the left side, we bring in the numbers, we do a calculation, and we get the tax numbers. And I mean tax numbers in the most general form. Could be income tax, sales tax, whatever it might be. It could be a deduction, could be the research credit. We take some numbers, we do a calculation on those numbers, and we get that tax number. Now that's kind of a simple tool, and there's some things that we have to do out there that are very simple or linear in their approach, and that's fine. And I kind of put in quotes simple tools Excel because we're all pretty knowledgeable in Excel and kind of deal with that, and that's kind of the avenue or arena that we kind of deal with those topics. Now the tax software, where tax software is really kind of needed or it's a necessity, is when you're bringing in those logic type items. And when I say logic, work with me in terms of it's requiring people to answer a question, not a computer to calculate a number. So that can be some different things, and we'll kind of delve into that in a little bit more towards into the research credit. And as tax folks or as CPAs, we like to gravitate to the left. We're very numbers oriented. We're always tying things out, so we're very numbers oriented. And bringing those logic or those complex questions into the equation, kind of, it pulls another part of our brain into the process. But that's where the tax software really kind of makes a valuable piece. So I want to kind of keep everybody involved and not get everybody, we're going to kind of open up a couple quick poll questions on our polls out there, and kind of make that a bit bigger. If everybody kind of, so on your return, federal, state, foreign, et cetera, what percentage of your items are complex? So those would be the things that, that require some logic, that require some thinking to how you get to the final answer. So if you guys can kind of go out there and give some votes, and I'll wait a couple seconds and we'll broadcast those. Everybody to kind of chime in. And what I'm trying to get there is just get a sense of, what are we kind of dealing with in terms of complex items and those that, require some thinking to beyond just calculating the number. All right, well, looks like getting amount of folks that are kind of in that upper echelon in terms of items returns that have a that are complex. So we'll kind of slide that poll off, and we'll bring in the next poll. It's a two-part question. Out of the complex items, if you think about it now, so we can think of that, those complex or items, how much influence do they have on your liability or your effective tax rate or your return? What is their influence? So we talked about number of items. Now let's talk about how much influence that they have. And just a reminder, everybody kind of mute your line so we kind of get no feedback from there. If you're kind of all right. A couple more seconds here. We'll give it a little 10 seconds and let everybody kind of chime in. Okay, why don't you go ahead and broadcast those. So you see, at least half of the folks that are on the call are kind of getting getting a sense that the complex items or the items that require some thinking to them are the ones that have a big influence on our effective tax rate or liability for our return. So we'll slide that poll off. get that out of the way, and we'll kind of keep moving here. So where to start? You know, kind of thinking in the R&D credit world, so we kind of talked about very basic some things, is where do we start with these complex topics or these topics that require some logic, is we don't want to start with the number. And what do I mean by that is that, you know, think of the research credit. The easiest first thing to do is say, well, how much do I spend on research and development on my financials? Okay, I'm done. And you kind of get to that point, and that's really kind of, you're circumventing a lot of things that need to be included in the way, along the way for getting to the research credit. We want to start with the qualitative. For example, in the research credit world, you know, what is the technical uncertainty? That is the, you know, that's a number one question you have to answer. Well, that's a very complex question. That's something you have to, there has to be some subjectivity to it. You know, some things that come out of the mandatory IDR. Did you use project accounting? If not, describe the method. Another one is, how do you determine if you satisfied the process of experimentation requirement? There's other questions of individual support to research. Is there contractual risk to the research? Those types of questions that we have to answer not only for the research credit, but for other complex topics out there require some thinking. And we need to kind of start in that arena rather than just starting to try to get to a number. And it's hard enough to kind of do these, answer these questions alone, and trying to get them into the software requires some different things that we'll kind of talk about in a second. And in the R&D credit, it's really, you know, the exam is critical in the R&D credit world. You know, how are you going to present the documentation to the IRS or to, you know, state taxing authorities or revenue bodies? What do they request? You know, we kind of, you know, showed some mandatory IDR questions. What do they look at first? What's their process? How do they go through and ask questions along the way? You know, in the research credit world, contemporaneous documentation, that engineering, you know, research type documentation is the most important piece that you have to really capture and know that you can exemplify of how you qualify for the credit. And that, you know, if you kind of skip that step and just go right to a number, you kind of open yourself up to a risk that you don't want to have on your return. And also there's some different things you have to start with of different industries, different documents, different types of people, different types of details. So where to start? And then, you know, we kind of talked about this, is who is needed. You know, kind of on the left side, the simple tool is really, you kind of, usually it's, you know, you either get some information from finance or get some financials from accounting, and it's in the tax department. It kind of stops there. Those are the people that are needed, very kind of controlled in terms of who's there. From the research credit, and for those logical, more complex topics, it's people outside of the tax, kind of make that umbrella bigger, that circle bigger around the org chart. You're going to get tax department, finance, engineering, operations, your external auditors, revenue agencies, outside consultants, a lot of things that people might get involved, and thinking about that, of who's going to get involved and how do we keep them involved, because they have a different set of priorities and they have a different set of a mindset. For the research credit, you know, the engineers or the research departments are the critical people. They need to be involved in the process. They would need to be involved in the software of how it goes along. So getting those people involved into these complex topics is very important, but it's very challenging. I would say it's very challenging, as most of you probably will know. So then, as we're kind of working along here, you know, kind of the cogs in the wheel, kind of getting to that tax number. At the end of the day, we still have to get to a number.
Hi.
But the software...
Call me back. Is she available?
Together, and if we can kind of make sure we got everything mute there.
I'm going to order you a new driver's license online, but I'm going to do it tonight from home. Is that okay if I call you guys and we do it together?
Hey, can we get the phone calls on mute, please?
Okay, I'll call you tonight.
Let's get,
Okay,
get the phone calls on mute.
The driver's license conversation was just broadcast. Can you please put your phone on mute?
All right. Well, we'll keep moving. So kind of the cogs in the wheel, you know, so we have to work this together. We got to make it simple enough for the people to kind of work together through the software to get to the number. building upon our qualitative answers to do that. And then, one more slide, and we'll kind of get into some pieces of the demo screens that I wanted to show you. So what is needed in terms of the tax part? What should be the purpose? And using this, beyond kind of when we're looking at our software, is performance, function, and quality, kind of breaking into those three pieces. The performance is the calculation portion of it, the presentation of it. Function are going to be kind of the redundant task, if we're going to, crunch numbers over and over, just be able to ask questions again, presentation being a functionality. Really that quality portion is what's going to set it apart. Is it complete? Does it provide the intelligence that a software should provide? And is it flexible enough? As all of us know, we have different data structures, different types of companies. We make acquisitions, we do a lot of different things. That flexibility becomes very critical in doing that. So for today, in terms of some of the pieces that I want to get to for our demo, there's kind of two segments, and we'll come back to the slides in a second, is that I'm going to show you a couple things that kind of set up flexibility, and I'm going to kind of get this. Okay. So let me kind of make sure this gets. Now remember, you got that full screen button, so if you want to put it to a full screen, you can. And obviously, kind of be patient as I kind of click through. I'll make sure I kind of be a little, cognizant of screens changing. So what you kind of see here is kind of a home page to our RCM product, and it's for research credits. What I'm not going to go into because for time's sake, I'm just kind of giving you an idea of flexibility that you want to see in your software that's out there in dealing with those complex topics. We've already set up our data. We've already sent out to our SMEs, our engineers, our research credits, kind of the emails that we want them to kind of provide some information to us. Just kind of given that we've done that. So now, if we are an engineer or a research credit individual, we talked about they need to be involved, and how do we get them involved? I have two examples here of kind of home pages that they would go to complete some information for us. You'll kind of see as I kind of go back between the screens, they're very similar, but they're different. For example, this first one that I'm on here now, it just kind of has, there's kind of those 5 steps along the way. This other one, if I go to a different department.
Excuse me, Nick.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're not seeing that. I'm not seeing that screen. I'm not seeing anything except the RCM demo.
You're not see. Oh, okay.
Dick, this is Paul. I can see it. So.
Can see it?
I do see it.
Maybe. I don't know. It might be that.
Oh, there it is. All right, never mind.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I got to make sure I slow down myself a little bit, because sometimes I click a little fast in terms of when everybody sees it. So kind of these are kind of, two different pages. They look very similar, but they do two different things. This one that we're looking at right now, you'll see on the right-hand side here as I kind of move my cursor, you'll see direct and support and supervision. We can kind of have the flexibility to understand that different departments or different groups of people do different things. So we require different information from those individuals. So kind of having that flexibility will change what type of information we require of those individuals. And for sake of this, you'll kind of see as I kind of go between those two different departments, the steps change. So we have to add projects for this one department, but we don't have to add projects for the other. All right, so as to kind of give you a sense of it, so now for the research credit, kind of dealing within this topic, what we're asking is we want them to update some basic description information, add some projects for us, allocate people to those projects, and we can review those allocations and we upload some documentation. So if we go into, if we're going to review and add projects, all right, so you can see here that we have, this is for that department that we clicked on. Now I'm going to show you the same department just in a different format. And really there's some flexibility that we want to have. It's really the same page, but we have to understand when collecting information for the research credit or other topics, that the engineers might do different things for us. Might be an engineer at company A and an engineer at company B, but they have some different ways of doing their information. So, take an example, C, having the engineers go through and give us a qualified, non-qualified. Some places, and you know, some folks don't do this, but some do, is they actually qualify projects by a percentage. So allowing that versus this page, looking at here, that doesn't have that. So, and as you kind of ask the questions, it can kind of depend on how we ask those questions. You know, the questions that are listed here, if it's text boxes, if it's check boxes, will depend on the type of company that you have, be it if it's, you know, if it's an automotive, if it's pharmaceutical, if it's software, if it's technology, if it's manufacturing, if it's, you know, whatever that might be, those questions will change. For all the research credit analysis that I've done, those questions that you see here on the screen from the demo, 99.99%, there are always changes that we want to make. So there's the flexibility that you have to have for these complex topics to change those questions and to really change those questions for different groups. So some companies have different divisions within their overall structure that might have the different data. So we want to make sure we have that flexibility to do that. And this is just another way to kind of present that information in more of a tabular format than a linear report format. So I will kind of close that for a second. And then what we also ask are, from an SME standpoint for our engineers, is we want them to allocate people to projects. Now, it's for folks that are familiar to research credits, the reason why we ask them to do this is because the IRS, over the past few years, has said we want to see project TREs. Well, we have to tie them somehow. Now, do we do it a direct correlation? You'll kind of see here we're assigning time or assigning percentages to, you know, employee Trev Alberts, assigning him 2 projects, and I'll kind of just show how we kind of do that. But really what we're trying to do is put them to a project. And this might be that one of your companies has data like that. One of your companies doesn't have data like that. So we want to do that. Or the whole company, we need to do something like that. There's also flexibility in how often or how frequently we want to look for the information. So we have to consider, do we do it by quarter? Do we do it semi-annually? Do we do it annually when we kind of do our normal tax gathering process? You know, some companies like to do it actually during the year. So for the 2011 tax year, they're already in their third quarter data collection period, and they have that open to kind of collect that information. Every company is different. So again, bringing back to that flexibility standpoint where that's really important for us to do that. At the same time, we can identify it to a project. We can put it to a task. You know, we can have our own different values, but that's more of kind of a functionality aspect. Versus another version where we don't have the tasks that are out there. We have another version that shows it not by a quarter. Again, when you kind of look at these complex topics and how do we apply software to it and bring in our people together, we have to have that flexibility along the way. So I'll kind of close those out. And then if we're back in here, we can kind of see, you know, here's just a reporting out for our SMEs in terms of here's their percentages of time to a project. You can kind of see that those who are, the reds are those who are out of not 100%. And then also just uploading documentation. This is actually one of the key pieces that we want to get engineers, is that from a tax perspective, we're getting engineering documents, test reports, weekly status updates. There's nothing to say that you cannot have that information and then tie it to a project. So then, as you can kind of see in a second, how we can report this out rather quickly and easily and be complete, getting back to that completeness aspect of it. So, uploading documentation, and it's just upload feature, drag and drop files or browse for files. that are out there. So, at the end of the day, I think those are kind of the major things I want to get to of tying people to projects. Again, within the research credit arena, we wanted the ability to ask them specific questions. We want the ability to, different activities for different groups, and we want to allow some certain actions depending on the company. And we go through this a lot more in our full-length demo, which obviously we're kind of just doing some different topics today. So back to kind of the presentation. So I showed you kind of some different ideas within the research credit, and the first question is, well, let's kind of make it. We kind of started at one end of the spectrum. On the right-hand side, we had no data. We could not tie people to projects, or we could not tie our activities to projects, and we always got beat up in exam for the process. Now that we know there's something out there, let's just collect all the data. Let's do it every day to do that. There's some balance, as I'm kind of trying to show the balance here, is, once we start, it's natural for us to swing to that one side and say, again, the people on the software slide at the beginning, slide all the way to the software side, software. Go collect every piece of data every day, every incident. The software is capable of doing that, but we don't really need to do that. We want to, again, on that qualitative, how do we keep it balanced and simple for our people that are outside the tax department? The non-tax people, as you kind of saw, we don't ever want to burden them with more than, 5 or so items that we need them to complete at one time, because it's not a ultimate priority for the engineers or the research folks. So their priorities don't trump, or tax department priorities don't trump, engineering or product development or manufacturing engineering priorities. And as you guys probably know, with other topics that are out there, you have to be, we need a lot of information from our organization, but we have to know that they have other things that they're trying to do to further along the organization or the company. So we have to throw some balance in there. So as you see some things, don't think we're going to swing to one way and then try to get make it so complex that we kind of lock ourselves in and we don't get any data at all because it's so hard to get complete. So again, kind of keeping on that topic of complex and flexibility as we get into these complex topics and the research credit, is that the more permutations of complex available, the more necessity of flexibility. We have to have a balance. And I'll kind of go around clockwise here for the research credit side, thinking of the people with technology. In terms of the projects, do we get general summaries versus more detailed interviews? You kind of saw more of a detailed interview on a project. Do we get through what kind of financials do we include into our research credit? Do we just base it off a general ledger, or do we get actual invoice detail? How do I identify the subject matter experts or the engineers or research folks? Do we look at all the engineers? Do we have engineering managers? That flexibility to kind of deal with both. What type of wages are we going to look at from an individual component versus a company component? Documentation. Do we have getting project-oriented documents versus more organizational cost center documents or department documents? Qualification of the projects. How do we qualify those things? Do we rely on the engineers versus the tax department? All those questions, and there's many more that come in within the research credit, but also thinking, kind of putting this in a context of overall, is how do we deal with that complexity and flexibility? For the research credit, because we have to interact with the whole organization, really, and this is more from, for us, is we needed something that was more on the technology rather than a platform. And I'll kind of speak to that for a second, is that because we have to touch so many pieces of the organization, building something onto a platform that's very tax specific would kind of eliminate a lot of the flexibility and intelligence that we wanted. So you have to look at platform versus technology, and technology isn't topic driven. Technology could apply to engineering, it could apply to research, it could apply to tax, it could apply to the operations, and we can still have that flexibility. So because we deal with so many things outside of the tax department and the research credit, trying to integrate everything into tax-specific platforms limits that flexibility and completeness and intelligence. So we have to think about that in these complex tax topics, because sometimes we want to integrate everything for integration's sake and don't realize we actually are leaving a lot of things behind because we have to normalize our research credit information, or if it's something else, into that integration, losing out on very valuable pieces that we need for the credit or the documentation. So complexity and flexibility. So we'll kind of jump back to the demo, and a couple of things that I wanted to show you. I'll kind of pull this back up. And, okay. So I will show you a few things. Let me pull up a thing. So kind of dealing again with some flexibility, dealing with some more presentation now as we kind of get to the end. So we've gone from the start, you know, in terms of people and software from the very beginning, dealing with the R&D tax credit. So now we've gotten people to fill out information for us, and we had projects and people to projects and documentation to projects. So now we want to look at some things in terms of some intelligence as well as some completeness and presentation. So one of the things that I'll kind of walk through, whoops, that's the wrong page. So you kind of see this is one homepage, what we call a tax executive homepage, where they can kind of see, you know, milestones outstanding for their research credit analysis, you know, any info request items that are out there, meetings and milestones and follow-up that are out there. This is another version of that same page. I'm making sure I get this, you know, again, you know, charting and graphing that are out there. The other thing is that, you know, a benefit summary. Again, tying that completeness together, getting through your federal, your California, or your Indiana, or whatever state credits that you might have out there, because, you know, with research credits or with other topics that are out there, it's not just federal that we're always dealing with. And how do you make that topic complete that's in there? So, you know, this is kind of an example of a California filing document that you would have for your California credit. And the same kind of vein is also putting some intelligent things on the page. Kind of slide over here. You know, from a research credit standpoint, we know that the IRS, if they see that we have projects, the way they kind of go about it, or even with, you know, departmentals or departments, they look at the top ones first. They're going to look at the number one projects. They're going to look at, you know, what's the biggest one. They want to start there first, and that's natural for anybody. So what do we want to do is we want to put that on your, you know, put that on your page, and have the ability to kind of dig into, to kind of make sure those are heavily reviewed, or a person is getting involved in looking at that. Again, kind of trying to point people to the right spots that they need to go to. So we take all this data, we have the software do a lot of our redundant tasks or performance. We put people to the right spots that they need to get to for looking at the projects, for getting into some of the details, a more detailed project report, and some of the documentation, and you see some of the allocations that we have that are out there. So then the other thing that we wanted to show was some intelligence. You know, this is so during the process of collecting information, doing our calculation of our qualified expenses for the credit, most everybody does this, and it's, well, what was last year? You know, in any tax topic, complex tax topic, what happened last year to what happened this year? What's that comparison? So obviously bringing in that data from last year, we're comparing dollars of QREs to one department versus their last year QREs, and this is just differences greater than 20%. So you can kind of, you know, kind of drill down into some things and see, okay, we have a couple test labs, and again, this is demo data, so you kind of see some test labs, or we can look at it a different way. We can say, well, let's just look at dollar amounts. So we'll look at the largest dollar amount that's out there. We'll see like there's $4 million off in total QREs in advanced engineering from last year to this year. There should be some sort of reason. Again, pointing people to the right spot, making that intelligence to say, okay, instead of trying to just gather the data, let the software kind of do that portion, and the people that need to be involved in more of that value-added analysis are pointed to the right spot to where they need to go. And again, we can kind of, you know, do that a percentage basis versus a a dollar basis, and you can kind of see it's just very similar. So that's kind of one of the intelligent things that we need to have when we have people in software, especially from the tax department. And you guys know this, is that the tax department, it's trying to build that time envelope that you have to do the analysis. Yes, we have a number, but is this the right number? Is this a quality number? What's the risk in this number? Am I getting, am I seeing everything to make a proper evaluation for risk? For UTP Fin 48 now, we have all that kind of in there. So we want to make sure that we're kind of looking at those things holistically and getting to those answers. And then last but not least is we get to the IRS. Having the IRS interact with your information presents a more formalized process, even though it's flexible in its gathering, presents a more formalized process. So it gives them that sense of, okay, you went through this formalized process to collect the information, and we're delivering this in kind of a, in the format that they need in terms of a project listing, projects, project purpose, qualified description, and QREs. And then similar as you kind of saw before, we can kind of drill down or let them drill down as much as we want them to, controlling their access and having access to the documentation. So we get less of the discussion with the exam team on, hey, we don't have the right documentation, to, hey, let's look at this project. Why does this project qualify versus non-qualify? And that's really where the discussion should be for taxpayers and so forth and so on. So there's some different things when we think of these complex topics. Again, when I said where do we start, we wanted to start at the end. Well, this is what we want to end up with. All the things we kind of went through are all the things we have to go through and have to have ourselves prepared for. And this looks very different for every different exam purpose, but that's one example. We have different examples that we can show. So I will get off that piece, and there's a couple more slides, and I think we're kind of okay. So buy-in. So buy-in. How do we get others from outside the tax department, thinking of those complex topics, to buy into our process? Kind of the honest truth is that if we're dealing with the engineers or dealing with research, we are not their ultimate priority. They do not say, hey, you know what can I do for the tax department today? That's not their number one thought when they come into work in the morning. So how do we get them to buy in? We still need them involved. We still need their information. So we got to number one, we're not the we're not the ultimate reason. We can't waste their time. We have to make something that's simple. Some of the and that's out there. We also have to be aware of their current processes. Some engineering groups, some research groups, some manufacturing operational groups out there have information that's useful that you can integrate in there or get into the data and not have to duplicate some of that information, because that would be a big turnoff, is that, hey, I've already done this somewhere else. Why can't we pull this information from there? Training. One of the things I didn't show you is, we kind of do a webinar like we're doing now, record it, show them what they need to kind of complete that little, like a little training or a little video for that. Repetition. And this is one of the things that gets very hard, is we do it once great, but it's doing it over and over to make sure everybody gets into the process of, to think of it, for example, what do we do every quarter? We have our quarter close, we have our year-end close, something like that, where we have a repetition to the process for those engineering, for those research folks, to build that into their work, for their process. Having a champion, making sure you have a champion in those groups to really understand the underlying value to that, and then replication. You make an acquisition, well, how do we replicate this over there, without kind of recreating the wheel every time, and then simplify it. As you kind of saw with our screens for the engineers or research or even for the IRS, it's very simple. It's very basic. Here's the information we need from you. If you just do this piece for us, that's what we need. Not trying to overburden them with a lot of complex things on the screen, or keeping it complete. So But I will tell you, it's very hard. This is not an easy challenge. You have to stay on top of it. It's not just you let the software, you turn it on and let the software, do everything, and all of a sudden it shows up. Again, people need to be involved. People aren't always responsive. Do you get 100% compliance all the time? No. But do you get 80% there? Yes, and you have to kind of always go after those 20%. That's always usually the case. So, last polling question, and we'll get into the last slide. I'll let you slide. So to kind of get a sense of everybody's, how willing do you find people, how willing do you get to find people outside your tax department to answer tax questions? Very willing, somewhat willing, maybe, once in a blue moon, and never. So I'll kind of give a couple questions, a couple seconds. All right, you can probably broadcast those. So it looks like everybody's got about somewhat willing is the overwhelming majority there, and that's good to get people interacting with the tax department. And it takes time. I mean, it's a lot of work to make sure everybody understands why the tax department is important and how we can work together. All right, we can slide that poll off as we go from there. And then, all right, so this is our last slide, and then we'll kind of jump to some questions so we kind of stay on topic. So how much should it cost? I know we kind of put that in our agenda. We're not going to share specific figures today because not going through everything. That kind of be just misleading to not knowing everybody's situation, and just want to kind of share some general things in terms of we talked about complex topics. We talked about research credits. How much should these things cost? In terms of how do we think about what should they cost or what should be included? So what's the level of complexity to your company? What's the IRS disposition to industry's documentation? In the research credit, different industries, the IRS looks at those differently. Software, the IRS looks at software differently than they look at automotive versus they look at pharmaceutical versus, technology. What are the different items that you have? This is not number of people or size of data. This is kind of, do I have 1,000 people at 1,000 locations, or do I have 1,000 people at one location? Some different kind of items more than just, numbers of people. How are they spread out? How are they distributed? And who do I have to get to? And again, it kind of leads into what type of people do you need involved versus everybody versus just the managers, and what's kind of the process that would be accepted. Our kind of way that we kind of go through it is we do a software as a service. A couple things that we kind of hold true to is we don't charge, for storing the data. One of the things that, you have to, think about is that, the tax software needs your data to do its work. It couldn't do it without your data in terms of, who are my people, what are my financials, and so it needs your data. So we're not going to, there's no charge for storing the data. And again, charging for users. In today's environment in terms of technology, we kind of talk about platform versus technology. Technology kind of can say, hey, you bring on the users. Let's do that. And then one of the things is we like to stand behind is that because we can be flexible to different data structures, to different organizations, to different industries, then changes should not be extra. And I'll say that one more time. If it's flexible, if your software is flexible, if that's one of the things it's supposed to be, then change should be a default. You should be always being able to change it because it's flexible. So if you have that flexibility, you should be able to change it. So if I get an acquisition that comes in and has a different set of data, I have a flexible system. So making that change shouldn't be something that I'm always getting charged extra for. And then behind it, some of the people that go into the process. Obviously, we're specializing in R&D credits. You want those tax specialists, those folks, who are providing the R&D credits versus software designers kind of looking at the questions. It could be within the tax department, hey, here are the questions that we need to ask, or it's working with your engineers saying, okay, they understand kind of both sides of the equation. here's the questions we need to ask, versus just, a software developer taking the code and just kind of pasting it on the screen. That's not going to get the desired quality of answers that you'd want. So, there's some type of service involved in a lot of these complex, logic-oriented topics, be it if it's outside consultants, your internal engineers, your internal research, your finance, depending on how your tax departments are structured. But somebody outside the tax department is going to be involved. So, when you think of how much should it cost, just don't think of outside consultants. Think of how much should it cost in terms of my company, in terms of internal time, in terms of organization, and what am I bringing to that table. So those are kind of my slides that I wanted to share today. And I know I kind of hit some high levels. I didn't get into everything that I've done, that we usually do on our research credit RCM demo. I'll kind of open it up some questions in the chat. One of the things I know Brenda wanted me to share, and we kind of share through our own newsletter, is most of you probably have seen, but with that LBI came out with the supporting schedule no longer needed for R&D costs on the M3. I know folks who are filing here coming up, hopefully you kind of noticed that. Line 35 on the M3, says in the instruction that said an indicator supporting schedule was to be attached, and there were some kind of responses or some questions that kind of came back and said, how are you supposed to do that? Well, then the IRS kind of came out, about a week or so ago, if I have this date correctly. No more. You don't have to have a supporting attachment for those R&D costs for 2010, and it won't be a requirement for 2011. And the criticism was that we were kind of giving is that it'd be kind of duplicative of information that might be required to disclose somewhere else in the return. So you kind of having two of the same thing. So that's a little side note. And I know Brenda said that maybe just share that while on the call. So any questions? We do provide more detailed demos. Obviously we get into more pricing as we get into that. The other thing I'll have Steve kind of drag onto the screen is if anybody wants, we kind of have a little glossy, one page. You'll see that you can kind of hit save to my computer. It'll pop up another window, and you can save that file to your computer. It has some more, some pieces that we kind of, you saw some of it, some of the other things that we kind of keep to doing that, that we get into more of the demo. It doesn't look like anybody has any questions, or I'm assuming we'll get offline, and probably everybody will ping me separately that they can, that we have out there. I will kind of post my email address for everybody. That's my email address in the chat. But if we don't have any questions, I think we're just a little bit over on the hour. And I can keep talking forever, but I bet, Paul, you better stop me before.
Yeah, well, first of all, Nick, I want to thank you. This was extremely interesting and very educational. I just want everybody to know on the call, as I mentioned earlier, we will be replaying today's webcast, and the link will be found on the ACT website, and it should be available shortly. Our next bi-monthly webinar will be October 18th at 2 o'clock Eastern Time. The topic will be business impact of VAT in the U.S. and U.S. tax trends, and that will be presented by Thomson Reuters OneSource, Indirect Tax. And be sure to check out the ACT website or watch your emails for more information about the webinar. Also, our next conference will be May 23rd through 25th, and that will be in Orlando, Florida at the Walt Disney World Contemporary Resort. It will feature presentations by tax, technology, and tax technology professionals. This will be the only opportunity next year to network with your peers and tax technology industry leaders, so you won't want to miss this event. The conference and hotel registration will open in December this year. And in the meantime, make sure to check out our website to find relevant material to help you achieve operational excellence within your department, such as our bi-monthly e-news, previous webinars, and much, much more. I'd like to thank everyone for attending, as well as Nick and the CFO Services folks for hosting and sponsoring this webcast. If you'd like to join ACT or like more information on ACT, please visit our website at www.taxact.org. Thanks again for attending, and I'd like to say that this webcast has now ended. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Paul.